Welcome to the Bridge the Gap podcast. Here's your host, Dustin Udke.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Bridge the Gap. I'm the second half of a home at home series here with my two guests tonight, Johnny Main, Nick Wilcox. We just did their show, the Fantasy Football Show, so you can go over and watch that on YouTube. We talked buy lows, sell highs. We talked waiver wires. We talked all things. So they're now on Bridge the Gap, this back-to-back home at home, and we're going to be talking about all things of when you should decide to bail on a player. Like, when do you jump ship? When do you hold on for another week? That's what we're going to talk about. But before we get started, guys, tell them where they can find you guys, what you guys got going on, and what they can look forward to coming up. Nick, let's start with you.
So at Nick_Wilcox25, the Fantasy Football Show, baby. DA.
Hey, baby.
Fantasy Football Show, because some people just use the, but we use DA. That's the Fantasy Football Show. But you can also check me out Wednesdays at TBQ Sports, talking, X's and O's, digging into the deep trenches of actual football. Not just talking just fantasy football, but, overall, just diving in X's and O's, talking about what happened, talking about, should people get fired, all these things. And we sometimes go off the rails. We'll talk about, Florida man stuff and everything. We'll just go off the rails sometimes. So it's a fun time. Feel free to plug in as well. But the Fantasy Football Show with my guy Johnny, every Tuesday and every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern on Sundays, Tuesdays 8 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, it's a great show. Johnny, what do you got going on this year for football?
Man, just working with my guy Nick. Same thing, man, right? You can find me at the Fantasy Football Show for sure on every Tuesday and Sunday morning. And then just check me out on Twitter. Just posting some memes, having a good time with things. But also too, man, just trying to drop some gems here and there. Me and Nick, man, just trying to bring good energy, man, to all of our viewers and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, and two great guys to follow on Twitter. I got to talk to you both at the Expo. Had some great conversations at the Fantasy Football Expo in Canton, Ohio back in August. You guys are doing a great show. I had a blast on your show. We were like an hour and 40 minutes. It felt like 20 minutes. It was great talking KOC and Naylor and, some UT and getting Nick going, right? So, I don't know if you guys have watched this show, but we start every show with
What exactly is the game?
Well, it is not a quiz or a trivia contest, nor is it a test of brute strength or athleticism. At its core, it's just a children's game, and I would wager that some of you here this evening have played Would You Rather?
So a classic Would You Rather for you guys. And since we're talking when to bail on a player, part of that is admitting you're wrong. So, would you guys rather be right with all your takes preseason, but have none of those players on your team? So you're like, hey, these are the top 5 values, or these are the top 10 guys. Like, this guy's going to be a sleeper. You're right about all those, but you've got none of them on your teams. Or would you rather be wrong about your takes? You call out 10 guys and go, this is the perfect roster, and you have them all on your teams, but you're completely wrong. But you have the right guys. So you're like, hey, I like player X, Y, and Z, and you're wrong, but you have players A, B, and C, and your team is actually good. So, Johnny, I'll start with you. Would you rather be right with all your takes and not have them on your team, or be wrong about your takes but have the right guys on your team?
I would absolutely rather be right about all my takes, for sure. I'm a mild egomaniac when it comes to making the right picks, and I love to be in drafts and be like, yo, I told you this was the guy. I told you this was the player. And even this year, like that's kind of a thing. I loved Saquon Barkley this offseason. Loved him, and I don't have a lot of them. So, yeah, man, yeah.
Nick, what about you? Which side of this would you rather are you taking?
I think there's a question that we constantly have to evaluate as people who make content, because I think that as much as our ego wants to be right about everything, we're going to be wrong about some things as well. So I'd just rather be wrong on the players that I was initially on and have the right players later on, because that just shows that I'm adapting to the information that's given, because we're always given different information because again, we can be on someone like a guy like Devon Achane, right? But now the circumstances have changed in Miami, where now it's like, all right, now we have a second string, potentially third string quarterback, and now we're just praying that he gets now more check downs and stuff like that. My status hasn't changed on Achane, but the information and the difference that's coming up now with no Tua definitely changes some things from a week to week now basis. So it's something along the lines of, we need to continually be adapting. So I'd rather just be wrong about people in the preseason because, look, like that's the preseason. That's before we actually started playing football. And that's where, again, where people will take you, for your word, I guess, at that point. But again, you have to constantly be changing. You have to be constantly evaluating, both as a person that makes content and as a player that plays in season longs, DFS, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I'd rather be wrong about all my takes. I'm okay admitting I'm wrong, and that's part of what this episode is about, is going, hey, this is what I thought. This was my process with the information I had available. And, right, we're going to be wrong. Even the best, most accurate expert is, right, 60, 70% of the time, if you're really, really good, like even that stretch. So I'm okay going, hey, this was my process on the guy, and this is how I got to that conclusion, and it turned out to be wrong because of X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to change my process and my opinion later on. At the end of the day, we're still players. Yes, we all make content. The three of us make content. We put out content. We're still players of fantasy, and we still enjoy winning. Like, that is still part of the fantasy that we enjoy. It is fun. Now, I agree that fantasy can be fun if you're not winning, but winning does also make it a little more fun. So, man, maybe there's a reason why they're not on my team. Like, maybe I was super high on Saquon Barkley, but I just couldn't get to him. Like, he went around higher. There's reasons why those players aren't on my team.
Yeah, man, because Nick's laughing because like almost in every draft we were in, he was sniping me on him, man. So
yeah. And it's funny because I was talking to my father the other week, and he was like, "How are you not doing better in fantasy football?" And I was like, "Listen, when you're in a league with a bunch of other
That's your father telling you that. Good Lord."
Well, when you're in a league with people who listen to my content or also do their own content, like I'm not in the league with like randos. I'm in a league with good players, and plus there's that huge percent of it that's just luck, right? Everything can point one way, and then something happens, and luck happens to be the other way. Like, you can be super high on Tua. I was super high on Tua. He got hurt. I was super high of Jordan Love in a lot of places. He got injured. That hurts my team, but the process was still right. So I think I'd rather be wrong with all my takes and be able to adjust, like you were saying, Nick, like being able to adapt and change as we get more information. I talked about this a couple weeks ago. Like, week 1 does not restart the process. It's just an additional data point to my process. Whatever my process was preseason on a player, week 1, week 2, week 3 is just an additional piece of information. So when we talk about knowing when to bail on a player, when to give up, when to drop them, and this could be in redraft when you're just like, hey, I thought this guy was going to have a great year, you drop him, or maybe it's that dynasty asset. Like, I was a big Laviska Shenault guy coming out of college. I think he had freak athleticism. I liked his situation, and it just never panned out. When do I know how to drop him? That's what we want to get to. So, Johnny, what's your evaluation? How do you build your expectations, and how are you evaluating players? Like, what are you looking at? Are you looking at projections, past performance, efficiency numbers? Like, what kind of stats and stuff are you looking at when you're building out your preseason evaluation or pre-draft evaluations on players?
One of the things or a couple things I like to pay attention to is I like to pay attention to offensive coordinators and any type of changes with that. I also like to pay attention to offensive line upgrades or downgrades. Those are things that I like to pay attention to, like in my process. I promise this will be the last time I mention him, but just like with Saquon Barkley, just seeing him in a better situation with a better offensive line, immediately knew that, like, hey, obviously a lot of season left, right? But I knew we could immediately expect an uptick with him as far as performance. Another guy that I was really big on, I made a couple of shorts about, was Rashee Rice earlier on in the off season, just in terms of the potential suspension looming, and there becomes a point, right, where you have to start looking at value, and I'm all about value. And even if there was a 2 or 3 game suspension, there became times in best ball drafts and season drafts and things like that where he was just going in the 6th round, which was too late. Couple of drafts, Kyler Murray earlier on, going round 7, 8 to kind of start the season. So those are things that, like, I really like to pay attention to during the off season.
Yeah, Nick, what about you? What are you looking at when you're building your evaluations on players?
So what I like to do really is, and I've incorporated this in my process for the last couple of years, and that's made me a sharper player, but also when it comes to content, and it's just getting my best ball drafts in. Getting best ball drafts in at certain times throughout the year because it starts for me. My process really starts beginning maybe mid-May. I don't like going too early, and I don't like starting way too late. I like starting around mid-May because that's where again there'll be some public perceptions about where certain guys are going. Like John talked about, Barkley going to a certain situation as an upgrade, and we know what type of player he is, and based on what so that takes into account. I like to look at certain things when it comes to if there's different schemes in terms of offense, like New Orleans. I was targeting a lot of Rashid Shaheed in my best ball drafts because he's not only that a great player to target for that format, but also because I think New Orleans had an opportunity to be versus the markets, felt that New Orleans could still be a decent, okay offense, depending on what Clint Kubiak has done. And again, through a couple of weeks, we've already kind of seen that already. But it's taking a look at things that, trying to look at what the public might be looking at too much. Like I didn't touch Drake London too much. The public was too high on Drake London, especially by the time we were talking football in April, he was already being drafted at the 1-2 turn constantly in best ball. Yeah. And best ball to me is a great tool to use to get a great perception of what people might be going on because that is real money. Mock drafts are a thing in the past when it comes to these platforms and everything because they don't give you a real take on what other things are saying. But I've loved it. That's the newest, not the newest, but like that's something I've really inquired into my process. As far as just how teams have changed, like, and that's helped with the process. Like who got underdrafted? Like last year, Puka Nacua. I kept on grabbing Puka Nacua last year. I could show you screenshots. I had like 80-something% of Puka Nacua because of the offense, because of where he was going versus what people thought the perception of his would have been. Like, and then if an injury had happened to that player, what happens to that offense? Like, so it's again like there's constantly changes that we've talked about, so we have to keep on updating our processes. But in terms of like the player take, in terms of like what things have been interchanging, we have to take a look at that constantly, and I think that's really important when it comes to just looking at statistics. Statistics only tell you a certain story. I like to look at game tape a lot more, just because I like seeing what my oddballs. There's certain routes that certain guys win on. That overall, like statistics can definitely tell you, but then there's also times where statistics will tell you a story that you may just want to see or hear versus what you actually see with your eyeballs. So again, like the Barkley thing was we're not gonna take a victory lap on him just yet. I'm not taking any victory laps till about like week 6. But in terms of like Barkley, it made too much sense. The best offense, he's the offensive line he's ever been in. The best offense clearly he's been in. With a decent quarterback playing alongside him. Like it was too much in terms of like what could go right versus what could go wrong. And that's also another thing where we have to tally all the things of if we're trying to take on a player and then versus a fade a player. We have to look at what's going to go right, what's going to go wrong, and where should I take him potentially in a draft. Like for instance, Drake London, like what could go right, what could go wrong, like what could go right. I mean, Drake London could have the best season overall he's probably ever had. This, that, statistically, whatever, better offense, this. But then also, what could go wrong? Like, and we're starting to see some both of them. We're starting to see both sides. Starting to see both things, and that's where you have to evaluate and weigh for the pre-draft process. Then when you're in season, you need to evaluate that even more because now you're looking at real life football. Now you're breaking down certain plays that Atlanta ran. Like Atlanta had ran way different plays differently week 1 versus this past week, right? They ran a lot of pistol formation week 1. We're like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
So then now it's like, all right, Kirk Cousins finally got his bearings a little bit more. Darnell Mooney started to get the ball more. We need to pay attention to that. So it's just there's other things that we need to pay attention to in season even more honestly. But in terms of process, like we need to continually evaluate all the time.
Yeah, I agree. I think something, Johnny, what you said was like looking at offensive coordinators. I'm a big believer that scheme and coaching matter more than we let on. We're always trying to look at these causation and correlations of like, draft capital or, the number 2 quarterback is always the, and blah, 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 and all these kind of things that people throw out there and unrealized air yards. And we get to show up in these metrics and people are always coming up with new metrics. I think they're fine and dandy, but for me, it's scheme and fit is where I look at it. I've been historically not on the Dalton Kincaid train because people go, well, draft capital is the first round, and look at his athleticism. And I'm like, cool, athleticism doesn't mean you're going to be used. When you look at the Bills system, Dawson Knox was still there. He was still going to split time. They go, well, he's not going to be a tight end. He's going to line up in the slot. I'm like, cool. They don't really use the slot receiver a ton, and I just didn't like some things. And the more I watched Dalton Kincaid, it's just not there. When I look at someone like Tony Pollard this year, I was big on Tony Pollard because people were all about Tajay Spears. He's the hot new thing. He's young. And I said, listen. And they were like, oh, it's going to be a split backfield. And I said, no, it's not. If you look at the coaching system that Callahan has run, it's always been a running back system with Joe Mixon. And I told someone, I said, this is about it's going to be like an 80-20 or a 90-10 split. And it's basically been an 80-20 split so far with Pollard because that's what he wants to run. So system matters for me when I look at a team that just doesn't utilize the tight end. When I looked at Cincinnati, they weren't using the tight end. Now they are. When I looked last year, I said going into the combine that it was Michael Mayer and it was Sam Laporta and it was Luke Musgrave who are the top tight ends. And I said, whoever goes to Detroit will be the number one guy because I like the system. Because you saw guys like Brock Wright and Shane Zelstra getting these touchdowns. It was just a system that prioritized the tight end. So I like that. Kind of what you were saying, Nick. I look at a lot of what could go right and could go wrong. And I always look at it as like hurdles on their pathway to relevancy. So how many hurdles they have to jump over? If I have to jump over 2 or 3 hurdles for a guy to be relevant, I'm out. Like, I don't want that. It's just not worth it for me. And I think best ball is a great way of looking at it because I think best ball to me, which I don't do a ton of best ball, but I look at the best ball ADPs, is really a best case scenario ADP, right? Like everybody's drafting best balls is like, this is where I think this guy could be. If everything clicks with Drake London, he'll be at the 1-2 turn. Okay, cool. If everything clicks, but if only half the things clicks, he's at the 5-6 turn, and if nothing clicks, he's at the 8-9 turn, right? And so that's what I'm looking like. How many things? It's like, well, if Kirk Cousins is healthy and good, if Drake London continues to become better, if they don't run the ball with Bijan Rane, if they do this, if it's like if there's too many ifs to explain a player, that's from like 2 or 3 is 2 is my max. 3, I'm like I'm not dealing with it. It's too much risk for me. So I like to look at situation, the scheme, the fit, the coaching statistics. And I also like to look at what's the best case scenario, but what's the percentage that they're going to hit that best case scenario. So if I'm looking at Drake London, like, is it a 50% chance he hits his ceiling? Maybe it's a 60% chance he's middle of the road. It's a 10% chance he's horrible, and it's a 30% chance he's good. I have to balance those kind of things in my head with every player. And let's face it, we do content. We can't evaluate every player as deeply as we want. Right. And I think that's part of it. And I think that's why season matters. And we have to continue to add to our process with more data points as the weeks go on, because we're not looking at every player. We might look at a handful and we might kind of do some 1,000-foot view things of players like, okay, we all expect the Falcons offense to be better. But no one was hyping up Darnell Mooney. It was London, Pitts, Bijan, right? And now we're seeing Darnell Mooney. Everyone said, oh, Pittsburgh's going to be good. George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth. No one was talking Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin. If you got fantasy questions, drop them in there. We'd love to answer some questions for you guys.
Calvin Austin, Van Jefferson.
Well, I'm just saying. We'll see what happens this week. If Van Jefferson is back, Calvin Austin might be dust again. Who knows? Yeah. But there's just those things we just don't know. Everyone was saying, look at the Packers wide receiver. Everyone said, oh, Dontavian Wicks is unrealized air yards and blah, 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 these stats and these metrics. And at the end of the day, Romeo Doubs is the guy I wanted because he was out there running more snaps. Like, I don't have to explain Romeo Doubs to you. It's like he's out there playing a ton of snaps. What's the percentage he's not going to play those snaps again? Very slow. I mean, he's not phenomenal, but he's good enough. Like, he's a good flex play for you.
Absolutely.
Let's answer this question real quick from Jason Ortiz. Will you trade McBride and Sutton for Stevenson and Pittman? My backup tight end is Ferguson. Johnny, what are you thinking on this one? McBride and Sutton for Stevenson. So I guess you're giving up McBride and Sutton to get Stevenson and Pittman.
Yeah, I am probably going to pass on this one right here. Like Cortland Sutton, Cortland Sutton's one of my guys. Trey McBride is one of my guys at tight end. I know he's a little bit banged up right now. I do like Ramondre Stevenson. Like I like the fact that he's the focal point of the offense for the New England Patriots. I'm concerned about Michael Pittman. And how he's going to fit into this offense. I know Nick and I, we talked on our show last week just kind of, or actually this on Sunday, just about Alec Pierce, and like it just kind of got bought up in passing. But like we're in week 3 now, so like we got to start paying a little bit more attention to how this thing is looking with the Indianapolis Colts, and what it is that they're doing offensively. And like I'm truly concerned about Michael Pittman, his value moving forward. So for me, I'm going to stay away from this trade. I'm going to hang on to Trey McBride and Cortland Sutton here for this trade.
Yeah, Nick, what about you? What are you doing in this trade?
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I think McBride has too much. Look, I know you have Ferguson. I would see about taking Ferguson, Sutton, and do it for Stevenson and Pittman. Just because I'm holding on McBride because I think Arizona has they didn't look the best this past week in week 3, but there's going to be better days to come for McBride. So I'm holding on to him. It's just I like the Arizona offense versus like what I'm getting back. Like I'm getting back Stevenson and Pittman, and to Johnny's point, I never was a Pittman guy coming into this year. I think last year he got luckier with Gardner Minshew at quarterback because Gardner was just peppering him with targets, peppering him with usage. I think with Anthony Richardson, it just remains to be seen what kind of passer he can be on a consistent basis, and that's what scares me. Because even if I'm doing a trade like this, where I'm giving up McBride and I still got Ferguson, I still don't want to rely on Pittman like heavily. If Pittman's like my wide receiver 4 everyday flex, totally different story. So I need context for roster. But for this trade straight up right now, no. I think better days are coming for Stevenson, of course, because New England should still find ways to get him the ball. I just wouldn't do it. The only way I would is if I was hoping to put Ferguson and Sutton in this trade for Stevenson and Pittman. Because that way I think better days are coming for Stevenson. He may not have that lion's share RB1, game that he had a couple weeks ago, but it's still in the cards for him to be a decent running back. But I'm not doing this trade because I do like McBride a bit too much, even though you have Ferguson. I just wouldn't do it for Stevenson and Pittman. Next question.
I agree with you on that. Like, I like the Arizona offense. I like what they can be, and I'm looking at that player on a good offense where you have Stevenson and Pittman on 2 bad offenses with a lot of question marks. Like, we don't know who's starting for New England. Is it Drake May? Is it Jacoby Brissett? What does that mean for the run game? Again, we expect a lot of people expected Anthony Richardson to be good because of his athleticism, but the guy's got like 15 games of experience between college and high school and pros. So he's still vastly underdeveloped. And yes, he can grow, but I'll take McBride, who I think, right, when we're talking about when to bail on a player, like I'm not willing to bail on McBride. My process on McBride was he's still possibility of being a top 2 target on the team, which we want for our tight ends. He's gifted. That scheme fits the tight end. Like he's still seeing a good number of runs. Now he's banged up right now, which is questionable. I think he's in concussion protocol, but he's playing over 80% of his snaps. He saw 9, 6, and then 6 targets. I'll take that potential for offense over someone who's going to see Pittman, who might see maybe the same number of targets. I'm assuming you're doing this because you need a running back in Stevenson, but I think you can find a comparable piece somewhere else, whether that's in a trade where you just trade Sutton for something or you trade Ferguson for. Can you trade a Ferguson for a Devin Singletary? Can you trade Ferguson for a Jerome Ford? Like, get someone who's going to get high volume, might not be the sexy play, but take Ferguson and turn that into a flex play running back, waiver wire fill-in for you guys. That's where I'm going with that. But I think that's a good point. Like, what do we do with these guys? So how long are you guys giving someone until you bail? So let's say it's someone like a Trey McBride or someone like a Michael Pittman who maybe you did or didn't have high hopes on coming into the year. Let's say you did. Let's say you had high hopes for Pittman that he could be a fringe wide receiver 1, and he is not. How long are you giving him till you're bailing on him? Nick, how long are you giving Michael Pittman? Or any player for that matter?
Man, Pittman was just not a guy I was not in love with of drafting that high. We're talking about Pittman going probably in most formats going late 3rd, between late 3rd, sometimes middle 4th, late 4th.
Yep.
And it's just that was too high a price tag for me because in order for that to go right, Pittman would need to be finishing as like a wide receiver 13, 14, just on the tail end of that high end wide receiver like too. And I thought there was way too many other receivers in that range that could have better outcomes over Pittman. And it's just because, again, if it was Gardner Minshew again, I would have a lot more of like that feel of like, okay, Pittman could probably finish this high. But again, not taking anything away from Anthony Richardson. I just think he's more of that, that dual quarterback where he is going to find someone more deep. He might find Pittman down deep, but the early signs already are pointing to he's finding these other guys deep downfield besides Michael Pittman. And we all know Anthony Richardson right now, his progression still needs to improve. Like, it's clearly that he's lacking as a passer at the moment. The good news is for Pittman is that he's still in a pretty high-paced offense based on how fast they run their plays. But I'm just not big on Pittman. Really never was. Again, in context, I would only have Pittman as like my wide receiver. If I had to start 3 wide receivers, he would be my wide receiver 3. Potentially wide receiver 4/flex in a format where we only start 1 flex. But yeah, like that's pretty much it. If I'm depending on Pittman as a wide receiver 2 every week, Godspeed.
Yeah, I agree. Johnny, how long are you going to give a player like a Pittman before you're ready to bail on him? Are you giving him 1 week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 3 weeks? What is it?
Oh, sorry. To answer your question, I would give Pittman like a few more weeks, like 2 at the max, to really find out like if there's any more here. But honestly, I wouldn't want to wait too long.
Yeah, I agree. Johnny, what about you?
For me, man, I'm already probably throwing out some trade offers right now. I'm probably sniffing around trying to find some of those 0-3 teams right now, right? Because one of the things is like he hasn't passed the eyeball test for any of us right now, right? Like that's one thing like we can definitely say like he hasn't passed the eyeball test. So I'm looking for some teams that are 0-3 or some teams that are down bad, like on their luck with injuries. And I'm looking, just sniffing out, just trying to see, because he still has name value. He still has name value as Michael Pittman, right? And there's going to be some people that, are going to subscribe to that and just think like, hey, man, he's just down on his luck. I agree with Anthony Richardson. He's somebody that last year as a UT fan, he wasn't someone that really scared me watching SEC football. First couple games in the NFL, he looked really good. I think one of the problems with him, right, is like now he's trying to play quarterback instead of going out there and being the athlete that he is and trying to preserve himself. And I think that's what's causing some of the problems. And I said this on Sunday morning. When you have Jonathan Taylor, you have to give him the football. Like you have to get that man the football, right? So for me, like I typically operate until like a 3 to 4 week time frame as far as like when I'm ready to bail on players. And then at that 3 to 4 week time frame, if they don't have that name brand and I haven't like spent a top 4, top 5 round pick on them, I'm gonna hang on to them obviously. But when you start to get into players that you invested picks in like 6th, 7th, and 8th round, now you really have to start giving some consideration to potentially letting this player go or trying to make a smaller trade to improve your team.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same boat as you. I've always say, and I say this all the time, is like once is a fluke, twice is a trend, 3 times is a pattern. And I'm willing to make moves on players based on the trend of a 2-week period and then really go in 3 times when I see that pattern. Michael Pittman only had 7 games under double-digit targets last year. He's already got 3 this year. Like he's just not seen the volume we saw last year. So when he looks at something like that, now I will say that it depends on what you thought of Michael Pittman, right? If I was expecting him to be in that wide receiver 15 to 20 range anyway, like a wide receiver 3, like you're saying, Nick, he's still there. Like he's low.
Is he though?
Well, you hope he can be
he
a flex
hasn't
play.
even finished as a wide receiver 35.
No, he hasn't. It's been pretty bad, but I'm still hoping that maybe. I'm like you, Johnny. I'm going to throw out some trade offers, see if anybody still has the name value who's not paying attention. So, Johnny, what kind of things are you looking at when you're trying to decide whether to bail or not? Are you looking at snap shares, targets, routes run, injuries, draft capital? Like, what kind of things matter to you when you're going, hey, do I stick with a Michael Pittman or do I bail on a Michael Pittman versus some other guys? Like, what kind of stats or information are you looking at to inform your decision on whether to bail or not?
I think it depends on the position, right? Like if you're looking at running backs, one of the big things I look at is like, yo, are you even on the field? Are you even on the field? Like when they're doing anything, are you on the field at all? Right. And I think like with some of like the advanced stats, with some of the advanced stats that like now they have, like, right, to be able to see things like first read, and things like that right there. Those are things that I pay attention to. But I also look to see, like, is this team even putting up points? And is there anybody nipping at this person's heel? And like talking about Michael Pittman, like we have Alec Pierce that we're talking about. And like at some point, like we were just kind of actually, it's funny now we're talking about this. We're talking about waiver wire names that probably should have been a name that we probably actually should have had on the waivers was Alec Pierce, because he's probably still out there in a lot of leagues. And I'm pretty sure, I don't have the numbers up right now, but I'm pretty sure his stats right now are probably, he's a startable player right now for wide receiver. I'm pretty sure he's in the top, got to be at least in the top 24 at least right now.
Yeah, he's currently PPR wide receiver 16, Alex Pierce. Now, he had 2 great games in a so-so game this past week, but he's a great flex player.
Right. So so now like you have to start taking that into consideration along with somebody like our boy KOC, Jalen Naylor, right? Yeah, KOC. So like for me, like that's what I look at. And then too, like as far as like running back goes too, like you get to see too, like, yeah, are they running any pass patterns? Are they in on third down, right? Like I think Bucky Irving is a great example right now, like of somebody who, like, I have Bucky Irving stashed in a lot of leagues, but I also have Ezekiel Elliott. So now obviously we're going into week 4. Bucky Irving is now going to be my running back 2 while Ken Walker is injured. So that's just what it is. So those are some of the things that I look at just from like a position standpoint.
Nick, what about you? What kind of factors are you looking at when you're trying to decide whether to bail or not?
I think you got to look, depends on the position. Like, I think for running backs, like we're looking at, I like my running backs to be three down type of guys where it's not like they're 3-down workhorses. It's more about, are they playing on all 3 downs? Is their route potential pretty high as a running back? Is their utilization as far as like a split backfield or a snap share? Is it a 60-40 split? Is it a 70-30 split?
Yeah.
Like whatever. For running backs, like that tells me a good picture. Like, so with a guy like, for example, like Jerome Ford, who, was getting drafted probably like, anywhere from, late, like early 8th round to like 9th-ish round or whatever, like a guy that you could just plug in as your RB2. A guy that's not going to be probably like, his range of outcomes is probably not going to be a top 5 running back, but his range of outcomes is going to be a very productive piece for your teams every week with a decent floor when he has those ceiling games. Same thing with Devin Singletary. Like I wasn't actively drafting Devin Singletary.
Talk about it.
It was an offense that I just didn't like. But he's still someone that's serviceable as a nice RB2 piece, and right now that's happening. Because he is the guy that is getting the most work. So again, like we have to keep things in context when it comes to these situations. But in terms of process, that's how I kind of go about it. I also go about it from a film perspective. Like, again, what are things that I'm seeing on the field? What is an offense doing that's actively getting this guy the ball? Like we just talked about Michael Pittman. Like he's not actively getting the ball. Like he's playing, 80-some% of the snaps. But like I said, he hasn't even finished as a top 40 wide receiver 1 game this year. We're 3 games in. For a guy that's supposed to be the wide receiver 1, like, yeah, that's yikes material. That being said, like it just goes into terms of what we need to see on the field and what's going on from a statistical perspective, and then combine them. Like we can't. There's people that ask, like, I got asked this a couple times at Expo. Are you more of a tape guy? Are you more of a statistics guy? I was like, I got to be both, because like, you can't just put all your eggs into one part of the game, because that's just not how it really goes for fantasy football. Like you have to combine both of them. You have to find out like what the edge is, because again, like I can always, if I see a running back go crazy on tape, that's great. But if he's not playing third down, it kind of downgrades him a little bit. Like, so like Derrick Henry, for instance, love Derrick Henry, but he doesn't play third down. He doesn't give me that PPR upside where he could definitely finish as the bona fide RB1. Henry could still finish a top 5 running back based on touchdowns potentially alone. But I need him to get some more, check down work, stuff like that, because otherwise he's easily game scripted out like we saw so many times in Tennessee. So that's just things where I think we need to take more in perspective on when we're talking about player takes, we're talking about guys we need to evaluate when it comes to from the statistical side, game tape combining.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's a lot of people who just go with like one analytic, or like even more so like I'm an analytic guy, but I only look at these three stats or these three metrics, and I think that's misleading because you can make stats say whatever you want,
Yes, sir.
and or they just listen, or even they just listen to. I listen to this podcaster, and that's the only guy I listen to. What he says is kind of like gospel.
Yeah.
I also like to look at injuries or potential injuries around there, and that goes as deep as like offensive line. So when you're talking running backs, like was there an offensive was their top tackle out? Does that matter? Yes. And then same thing. So when you look at guys, wide receivers, if they have a great game, were they missing not playing against the top corner that's now back? Does that make it like when you look at guys like Isaiah Likely week 1 blew up and everyone's like, oh, he's gonna be the guy. I didn't see it I think it was very game descriptive. Again, once is a fluke. We've never seen it from him before. I just wasn't buying that. And so I'm looking at that. I'm looking at injuries, potential guys coming back. When we talk about Michael Pittman, talk about Alex Pierce, we just saw Josh Downs come back for the first week. Like he is a young guy that people liked last year. We still have Adonai Mitchell. So like we're getting to one where it's like
Crowded.
there's a lot of mediocre mouths to feed there. And but yeah, it's like the group of mids. But when you have 4 mids and a mid quarterback, I don't think I want any of it, and I'm willing to think. So let me ask you guys this: does it change per player based on the player's history? So someone like a Travis Kelce, who historically has been really good, does it also change based on your team? If you have one guy that you're maybe waiting on, like if you can, let's say you have a Travis Kelce or you have a Michael Pittman, but you have a JSN, you picked up some of these late guys that are excelling, and you only have one of them you need to wait on versus having 2 or 3 of them. Does that change your opinion on when to bail? If you have more guys. So Nick, let's start with you. If you have one guy versus 3 guys, does that change your opinion on when you might bail? Might you bail a little sooner? And also, will you bail sooner or hold on longer if the guy has a history of being a top guy like a Mark Andrews or a Travis Kelce?
I think that depends on the player we're talking about. It depends on the team construction and depends on where we're at as a team. Like if I'm 0-3 with Travis Kelce, we have to talk about seeing what we can
get. That's a very good point. Where you're at as a team really matters.
It does, because that's going to determine like what we can still be doing. Can we still wait? If we're a 1-2 team with Travis Kelce, we could still afford to wait another week, potentially 2. Like warning sign, kind of like, panic a little bit in a ways for me is if you start the season out very slow, 1-4 or something like that, that's where it depends on how the rest of your league is. Yeah, then it's really time to make a move. I'm not panicking per se just yet. If I have Kelce, I'm like 1-2 or whatever. If someone brings me a decent offer that helps my team now and potentially helps me for later on when my team gets better, I have to consider it. But in terms of, if we're talking about Travis Kelce, who has a history of producing and whatever have you, yeah, I think that's someone I would be willing to wait a bit longer for. He'd have more of a leash, they say, right? It's like real life football and how quarterbacks only have a certain, they only have X amount of games, before we need to go a different direction if it goes south, right?
Yeah.
A la Mitch Trubisky for the Pittsburgh Steelers a couple years ago.
Shots fired.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
So Nick, does it also change for you, Nick, if you have multiple guys on your team? If you have a Travis Kelce and a Michael Pittman and a DeAndre Swift, are you then more willing to bail sooner because you have, let's say you have 2 or 3 of those guys that are all kind of underperforming? Are you bailing sooner on 1 or 2 of them?
I think you need to bail on at least one of them in terms of what you can potentially get. Now, if we let's say I do have all 3 of those guys on the same team, I need to figure out, all right, I probably won't get much for Swift, so I need to just hold the bag. Like, we'll have to see if he can have a decent game and then look to flip him, right? That's one. I think Travis Kelce would be the interesting one because, look, I think he has the most name value out of all the 3. And if I get something I'm more comfortable with at tight end and then get another piece out of the deal, then okay, I'm all right with letting Travis Kelce go at this moment because I needed to get production. Now, if Travis Kelce ends up turning around and stuff like that, then you start kicking yourself in the woo-ha. But it's one of those things where it's like you have to evaluate like where your team is at. And I always tell my the people that watch our show and the people that ever have conversations with me, or whatever, evaluate your team now. Is it championship material? And if the answer is no, then you need to make a move or two, because otherwise, what are you doing? You're settling for third place, settling for fourth place.
Yeah.
Look to make the moves, get active. Even if you're a league that so-called doesn't make trades, like, you're gonna be pissed off when that one trade that happens, and if it happens for you and it's not yours. If it's not yours, like, it may be somebody else's, and you'd be kicking yourself. Man, I could have offered something better. Da 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 da. It's like, well, did you make trade offers constantly with not just one player? Did you make it with other people? Like, like, this is some of the stuff with fantasy football also translates to business. Like, It's like knock on the door and you're like, oh, okay, we don't want your chocolate. All right, cool. Next door.
I'm done.
Knock on somebody else. Like, you can't just say, oh, God didn't take my trade off.
Yep, and it's really good because we, on last week's episode, I had Tommy Blair on, and we talked about when to basically decide to go into rebuild, like when you make that decision on your team. And we kind of said, like, week 3 or 4 is really it, because that's a third of your season. And if you're 1-3 after this week, or you're 0-4, you pretty much need to rebuild if you're a dynasty. Johnny, what about you? Do you make a decision based on people's history? Does that give you pause? Are you holding guys longer because they have a history, or are you ditching guys sooner if you have multiple guys that you need to maybe bail on?
Man, for me, like, I always preach patience, man. I always preach that, and the reason why I always just preach patience is just because, like, these guys are NFL players, and, like, if a lot of things haven't changed and they're just off to slow starts, they're gonna pop. And there is nothing worse than when you hang on to a guy for 4 weeks, you trade him, and then the next 4 weeks he's the hottest player in the league, and you're still sitting there to Nick's point, holding the bag. Like, that's the worst thing for you. And then I think there's some other elements that I think about as well. Is like, you also have to think about those teams that are in, like, really good positions and how to utilize, like, your waiver claims or your fab, right? Like, if you have a player that still has name brand value, like, if you drop him, people are going to scurry to get him. And now all of a sudden now you move up in the waivers if you're still playing with waivers. If you're still playing with fab, then now, or if you're playing with fab, now people have to use fab. But for me, like, one of the things I absolutely trust about my process is late round. Like, I might stink the joint up in the first 6 picks, but I know my next 6 picks are going to be money. And
clean up.
Yeah, like, definitely. Like, man, your boy Dustin Khalil Shakir was a guy that, like, I aggressively went after in every single draft, and it's starting to pay some dividends for me. So, like, to the point of, like, if I have Khalil Shakir, which there's a league where I have Khalil Shakir and I had Brandon Ayuk, and I was able to make a trade and get my guy George Pickens, which George Pickens and Brandon Ayuk have been very similar right now. And, like, it's just that name brand value and that recency bias that, like, a lot of people will say, oh, man, you traded Brandon Ayuk for George Pickens. Well, at this point, I'm 0-2, so I need to do something. I need to make a move. And at this point, if my team's going to stink, I'm just gonna go out with my guy, a guy that I've had graded out, pretty high the entire offseason. As far as dynasty goes, this is actually my first year in a dynasty league, and I trust my process so much that, like, I'm not one to just make moves just to make moves. So I'm standing kind of pat with where I'm at from a dynasty perspective, man.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. When we're talking about bailing on a player, we're not saying, like, just straight out drop him. We're talking about, like, moving on and trading him and getting something back. Like, you might be not what you paid for him. Like, you might have a 3rd round pick that is like a Michael Pittman that's not performing, and maybe you get someone back that was drafted in the 6th round. That doesn't matter. Like, I look at it like, what points are they going to give you your team? So we're not saying just outright drop these players, but we're saying, like, maybe start looking for ways of getting off of them, whether that's a 2-for-1 trade and you can package them and someone else and upgrade, or it's a 1-for-1 trade, or maybe you can figure out a way of getting off them. Even just getting them out of your lineup, I think, is a way of ditching the players. Like, I think we a lot of times go, well, this guy was drafted high and he's a name, I gotta start him. Like, there's a world where Travis Kelce probably shouldn't be started in fantasy football this week because he's just not been good. And I think that's where we have to learn to, like, it's a soft bail. Like, it's a bail out of your starting lineup onto your bench. We have to, like, just can't go, oh, Travis Kelce is a set and forget it. We have to go, okay, I need to make a move, pick up a guy, and pivot that way and bail on him in our starting lineup and go, he's not what I thought it was, change our process. So,
but one thing, Dustin, man, like, not to cut you off, but I think, like, you talked about that soft bail. Like, you're gonna create, like, some interest. Like, if all of a sudden you're sitting Travis Kelce, your league mates notice, why are you setting Travis Kelce? Are you looking to move off of him? So now you probably do field a couple of offers. So that's definitely a good call out, bro.
Yeah, so let's do a little thing that I call stick or ditch. I'm gonna name some players. Tell me if you're gonna stick with them or you're gonna ditch them. Let's start with a guy that I've never been high on, Dalton Kincaid of the Buffalo Bills. 2 rough weeks, had a touchdown last night. Nick, are you gonna stick with Dalton Kincaid or are you gonna ditch him?
I gotta say ditch, and it's the only reason why is because when you're getting when you're running less routes than Dawson Knox in the first half of this past game, it's just concerning. Like you're only being, your route participation's about 50% from this past week. Like it's definitely concerning because you drafted Kincaid to be a top 5 tight end, and right now it doesn't look like that's the case. Could it be in the next 3 or 4 weeks? Sure, but if you can't wait, I would ditch him. If you can, I'd stick it out to find out. But again, it's one of those things where it depends on where you're at roster wise. Like if you're 3-0 team, 2-1 team with Kincaid, cool. Like if you're 1-2, maybe. But if you start 0-3, you need to make a move immediately. You need to take this performance off, making him getting a touchdown, and look to flip him.
Yeah, just to show you how bad the tight end position is.
That's
Kincaid
bad.
is currently the tight end 11 on the year, which is sad because he's been trashed. Johnny, what are you doing with Dalton Kincaid? Are you going to stick or ditch?
I'm ditching him, man. I only drafted him, I think, man, in one league anyway. He wasn't a guy that I was targeting. I wasn't really high on him. I think I'd actually seen and read some articles about, to your point about the snap share with Dalton Knox, Dawson Knox when he was on the field with Dalton Kincaid.
Yep.
And that was the thing that kind of made me kind of pause and be like, yo, do I really want to spend a 2nd or 3rd round draft capital on a guy that's splitting time at a onesie position on top of being really high on Khalil Shakir and knowing that the rest of the group was also looking at Keon Coleman, and obviously there's some Curtis Samuel truthers out there as well. So I just there wasn't a clear pathway for me to get to the pass catcher for the Bills, which is why I landed on Khalil Shakir, the only guy that really had a chemistry with Josh Allen. So I'm ditching him, man.
Listen, Gina Noble, if you're listening, cover your ears, but Curtis Samuel is hot trash. I don't know why they throw him the ball. Curtis Samuel is that bag when you're out on a walk in the park and you see that plastic bag in the bush that's damp and hot and moist on the outside, but dirty and crusted on the outside. That's what Curtis Samuel's like. Yeah, you can put targets in them, but you probably shouldn't. Yeah. So they need to stop with Curtis Samuel.
They haven't need to use him yet,
Oh, stop!
No one needs
him, bro. His time is came and gone, man. Get him out of here.
The USFL doesn't use him.
Let's pump the 3.
Oh my god,
Curtis Samuel's hot trash.
Yeah.
Let's go to another tight end.
I'm really shocked by you saying this stuff about Kincaid and Curtis Samuel. I'm pretty shocked by this.
Curtis Samuel's hot trash. And
okay.
I would say that to his face.
Okay.
All right, let's talk about another tight end.
Johnny, already. It's only about to be week 4.
Oh my god, stop.
All right. Okay.
We'll see. All right, Mark Andrews. Johnny, you sticking or Mark Andrews?
Ditching. He wasn't even the tight end for me. He was another guy I didn't draft a lot of. I didn't draft a lot of him.
I didn't draft any Mark Andrews.
Yeah, I don't even think maybe best ball I might have maybe one share of him. But Isaiah Likely, he was a guy that I was taking as a free waiver, basically a free pick all the way through best ball season and even in some redraft leagues for sure. He popped week 1, didn't start him, but Mark Andrews, I think I was just watching or I was reading an article about players that have had a very similar surgery to his and how it's taken essentially a year to get back in the swing of things, and then an offense Baltimore, the ball goes everywhere. It goes everywhere. And I think right now, Isaiah Likely, I would rather have Isaiah Likely than Mark Andrews right now. Maybe that changes, in week 8, maybe that changes. But for me right now, I'm as we say here in Maine, I'm all set with Mark Andrews.
Nick, what about you? What are you doing with Mark Andrews if you have him? Are you sticking or ditching?
Yeah, look, it's rough. You only got targeted one time.
Yeah.
Against Dallas. One time.
Yeah.
Now, granted, Ravens were running the ball constantly. Marley threw the ball 18 times last week. But yeah, I'm ditching Mark Andrews because look, the price tag on him is still going to be versus for the average person in your league. It's still going to rate Mark Andrews as this, elitist tight end still or whatnot. And until that changes, like it's still if I'm talking to the Mark Andrews guy and he wants to come off of him, it depends on what he would want because the perception of Mark Andrews is that he's still this elite tight end, whatever. And that right now, it's not looking like the case. And right now, he's looking like a backup tight end. He's looking like Charlie Kohler out there, literally.
Charlie Kohler.
He's got more right now production than he does right now.
For real.
And yes, it's only week 3, going into week 4. But again, it's context on what people might want to come off of him if it's that. Like, if I'm ditching Mark Andrews, like, what am I going to get for him right now? So I have no choice really but to hold the bag on Mark Andrews and find another tight end to start until, Mark Andrews' value rises up again. And then who knows if that's going to happen. That's a question we have to ask ourselves. But I think I'm ditching Mark Andrews because I don't have any of them in my 8 leagues. So, I have likely in a few of them.
I have Mark Andrews in a few leagues. I was higher on him than this year, and he hasn't panned out. I am a soft ditch. I will take him out of my starting lineup. I agree with you, Nick. Like, once he has a good game and his value goes up, then I'll definitely ditch him for sure. I mean, right now, before week 3, his value was Calvin Ridley, Jaden Reed, DeAndre Swift, Evan Singletary. It's probably lower than that now. You're looking at probably a Zach Moss, a Zamir White, Christian Kirk, Terry McLaurin.
I mean, give me Christian Kirk straight up.
Yeah.
Give me Christian Kirk straight up for Mark Andrews. That's interesting.
So speaking of wide receivers, are you sticking or ditching Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets, who has been good but not great?
Come on. That you shouldn't have gave me that one. I'm sticking with Garrett Wilson because look, this is more of like I know the statistics haven't been great. 5 catches, 33 yards this past week, but the Jets, from a game script perspective, really was very impressive. When it comes to like just that game script format, like Rodgers didn't have to air the ball out like he needed to. It's not like they were playing from behind or anything like that. But we all know that, again, the ball is only going to go to Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, maybe Conklin, maybe Mike Williams, and sometimes Braylon Allen when he gets in the game. But it's about it. The good news is that you can still buy low on Garrett Wilson because people are still going to take this as, the Jets, this, or whatever, But Garrett Wilson's still a very elite talent when it comes to, being a receiver. And Aaron Rodgers said something, it's more of a quote, but he was talking about once they get on the same page, it's going to be scary.
Mm.
Yeah. And I agree. It's going to be very scary for the people who don't have him.
Yep.
So make sure you get Garrett Wilson. I'm sticking with my guy, Garrett Wilson. And it's not just from a fan perspective. It's literally just from a fantasy perspective in which, all right, I can buy low on Garrett Wilson because I believe in the talent and I believe in the connection. And again, the route tree is going to be very narrow versus some other teams, like we just talked about the Colts, where we have no idea where the ball is going to go to on a consistent basis through the air. You know where the ball is going to go to on the New York Jets.
Yeah, Johnny, what are you doing with Garrett Wilson? You sticking or ditching?
Sticking, man. Sticking. He's a talent. He produced last year with lackluster quarterback play, to say the least. I do think that Aaron Rodgers and his trust in the connection is definitely going to get there. There's going to become a point in time, obviously, at some point in time in the year where, when that connection hits with those two, you're going to see Garrett Wilson. You're going to see him take off. I think you could see him attempting, earlier on week 1 against the 49ers. Obviously, they were playing from behind. You see how many times he was trying to get the ball. Yeah, man, maybe he hasn't impressed. But again, this is the player I was just talking about. You move off of this guy. This is a guy that can throw up 30 points on a weekly basis for a 2 or 3 week stretch. I would much rather hold on to him and benefit from that versus give it to my neighbor for the low.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Garrett Wilson has not performed to what we thought he would be. We thought he would be a top 5 wide receiver, and he's not been performing that way. But I'm not going to ditch him for pennies on the dollar right now. If you're talking, if I'm going to trade Garrett Wilson, I want, a Jefferson, a Chase, an Amon-Ra St. Brown, a Lamb, maybe a Nico, even that's iffy. Like, I'm not sure I trade him for a Malik Neighbors or Rashi Rice or anyone in that range right now. So I'm sticking with them. We'll do one more, and we'll start with you, Johnny, since we did Jets for Nick. I'll give you Najee Harris for you, Johnny. You sticking or ditching Najee Harris?
I'm sticking, man. Najee has done that. He's done this. He's done this the past 2 years. Najee is traditionally a slow starter. This is just what it's always been with him. But as the season progresses, I can't tell you how many times I had people come up to me, like, at my daughter's school or whatever, and go, "Hey, man, what do I do with Najee Harris? Do I trade him, man? He's not doing anything." Da, 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 da. And I was like, "Yo, just hang tight, bro. Just hang tight." And Najee was a player that if you had him or you traded for him last year coming down the stretch, he was a guy that was critical to your fantasy success, maybe even potentially won you a championship. And I think now we fast forward to this year. You look at the product that they have out on the field defensively for the Steelers. Like, there's going to be a lot of games like that. Arthur Smith obviously wants to run the football. We haven't even got to the Justin Fields RPO explosive piece yet. So I think like that's another phase that's going to be opened up. Right now, I think he's on the field about 55% of the time for the Steelers. Jalen Warren is dinged up. I'm absolutely holding it with Najee, especially if you have a really good roster right now and you're winning with your fantasy leagues. I'm hanging on to Najee because he's going to be money for you coming down the stretch. However, I will throw this out there as a caveat. Got to pay attention a little bit later on in the year because as you get later on into the year with the Pittsburgh Steelers, they have one of the toughest schedules in football going against the AFC North. I think it's from week 12 to week 17. They have the AFC North. The Philadelphia Eagles originally was supposed to be a tough matchup. Doesn't look like that now, but they also play the Kansas City Chiefs on Christmas Day, which is right in that fantasy playoff window. So those are just some things to keep an eye out for with Najee.
Nick, what are you doing with Najee? You ditching or sticking?
Well, I was big on Najee coming in because of the opportunity that he was going to have in Pittsburgh last year of his deal, and Arthur Smith coming into town. With not a lot of talent at receiver outside George Pickens for receivers in Pittsburgh. So I'm definitely sticking with Najee. I think that, schedule's going to get tougher and whatnot. But I think in a realm where Harris is easily just a decent, middle of the pack RB2 with a chance for some ceiling, I think you have to rock with Najee Harris, especially if you drafted him as that or even as a flex play. I just think from a volume perspective, he should get you there on a weekly basis in an offense where, again, doesn't have much else, doesn't have too much talent outside of Pickens and fire moves and stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree. The volume for Najee Harris is just incredible. When you're seeing 20 carries, 17 carries, 18 carries, and now you have Jalen Warren's not going to be there, like he could see 20-plus carries for the next foreseeable weeks. A week 9 bye, I agree with you. After the week 9 bye, it's Washington, then Baltimore, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Philly, KC. Baltimore's also in there again at 16. Like, it's a tough matchup, but I'm willing to stick with them now just because you're going to get volume. If you're expecting them as your running back too, you're going to see a ton of volume. End of the day, volume's king. Like, I'm willing to hit and see those opportunities. We got one last segment here. We're just going to do a quick, since it's spooky season, Halloween, my favorite holiday is right around the corner. We're going to do a pick your poison. So I'm going to give you guys this or that, and you're going to tell me real quick which one you want. So let's start out with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers running back situation, Rachaad White or Bucky Irvin. Nick, which poison are you going to pick there?
Irving, because I didn't like White either. I didn't draft him in any of my leagues either. Always thought that Irving was a guy that we could just stash and find out what's going on, and so far it's happening.
Yep, Johnny, where are you at?
I'm Bucky Irving for sure. Rachaad White. I didn't draft a lot of Bucky Irving. I picked him up off of waivers, but I just would let other people figure out that situation with Rachaad White. And you don't draft a running back, especially in this day and age. You don't draft a running back in the 3rd, 4th round or whatnot just to have him on your roster. He's going to get some run.
Yeah, I've been a Bucky Irving guy. I said a month ago that you wouldn't be able to trade Rachaad White for Bucky Irving come midseason. And I put a poll, and it's still active on Twitter. 294 votes. It is 77.9% Bucky Irving over Rachaad White. So I think everyone is on the Rachaad White. Let's do another running back group, and this is the Kansas City. We've got Carson Steele, Samaje Perine, and I'll throw in Kareem Hunt, who just got activated off the practice squad. Johnny, who are you taking in that running back group. Who's your poison there?
Oh man, like I say this, but I was like, oh Wolf. Man, I'm gonna go Samaje Perine, and I know that's a very unpopular pick because Carson Steele just got the 17 carries last on Sunday night. But I feel like Samaje Perine is a guy that like he's a jack of all trades, right? Like he very easily could get on the goal line and he could punch one in. He's gonna play on third down, and when you have a franchise quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, they're gonna play the guy that can keep him protected. And like Samaje Perine, like that is absolutely in his wheelhouse and his skill set is to do that. I don't know about Kareem Hunt, man. I think obviously there's familiarity there, but out of this whole group, man, I always say this: with Andy Reid, give me the pass catching back, especially if it's a situation like this, and I'll ride out.
Nick, what about you? Which poison are you taking in the Kansas City backfield?
Yeah. Do I have to take one?
You did. Right. You got to pick your poison, man. That's why it's pick your poison.
I'll just take Carson Steele for the moment, obviously. I picked up Kareem Hunt when I had the opportunity to, and that was just based on because everybody was trying to grab Perine or Steele. So I still think Kareem Hunt could be something later on in the year, but I think Carson Steele, he's a violent runner just like Pacheco, and if you're able to pick him up, like as far as like your waiver claims, if you drop like half your fab and stuff, like I guess that's a good move, but it's still not like a high level like move where Carson Steele's gonna drop 2 touchdowns and something like that, whatever in the game. I'm not sure if that's gonna happen. Because Kansas City does weird things at the goal line. I'll just take Carson.
Yeah, I'll take Carson Steele for the memes. Like, give me that alligator pet. Like, let me think about that. Let me have PETA come after me because I know they've gone after some people reporting on that. Like, I don't care. All right, last pick your poison. Green Bay Packer wide receivers, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, Jaden Reed. No, you cannot take Davian Wicks because no one should take Davian Wicks. So Reed, Watson, or Doubs. Nick, who you taking?
That's Jaden Reed all day. Said it from day one. Jaden Reed was the guy for the Packers in terms of being that wide receiver one. People were calling me crazy because Jaden Reed was he's like wide receiver 3 because he's a slot and stuff like that. It's like, but you guys are idiots because you don't watch game film and you don't watch Jaden Reed and how electric he is. What did he do week 1? Okay, I've said enough. But I would take Jaden Reed even with now, with Jordan Love potentially coming back, he's definitely the alpha of this offense.
Honey, who are you taking?
Oh man, Nick knows where I'm going, man. Jaden Reed did look really good week 1, man. Almost made me change my mind, but I still want to see what this offense looks like with Christian Watson. I still want to see what it looks like, man. Jaden Reed, man, I can't deny it that he looked good. But yeah, like I took.
Talking about a guy that didn't give any usage the week prior.
Man, I'm looking at it right now. That's it, man. I see the routes ran. I see the routes ran. He's third in routes ran. I see it, man. I said I want to see what this looks like with him in this offense because we still haven't got a chance to see it. So, hey, man, call me crazy, man.
Yeah, you're crazy because I'm not taking McCole Harbin. I mean Christian Watson. I mean Marcus. I mean Christian Watson. I'm not taking. And I said this on your guys' shows. I'm a Romeo Doubs believer. I think he's the most consistent receiver. I think Jaden Reed has special abilities. I just wonder about his opportunities on the field. How many total opportunities can he get in terms of snaps? So I'm gonna take Romeo Doubs. So we're all split between those. So that's been when to bail on your players. We hopefully gave you guys some good information on when to bail on your players, what kind of look at to bail on your players. So before we get out of here, Nick, tell everybody where they can find you this season, what you got going on.
At Nick_Wilcox25 and with my guy, Johnny Main at the Fantasy Football Show. Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. And then Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern, we got the props, the bets, the start sits. Panic mode, settle you guys down into the next week. We got you covered.
Johnny, what about you? What do you got going on this year besides your shows? Where can they find you and give them anything else you want to plug?
Yeah, man. Just be on Twitter. Be on the lookout, man. Made some shorts during the off season, so maybe trying to get back into something like that right there. But yeah, just hanging out with my guy Nick, man, and creating good content for you guys, and trying to make sure, man, we have a good time for sure.
Yeah, definitely give these guys a follow. Check out their show on Sunday mornings and Thursdays before our show. You can check them out. Thank you guys so much for coming on. This was a blast to do your show, than my show, back to back. It's been a ton of fun. Love meeting you guys in Canton. 2 great follows. Their Twitters have been scrolling at the bottom the whole show. So drop them a follow on Twitter. Hit them up if you got questions. Check out their shows. Thanks for tuning to Bridge the Gap. Hit that like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks for tuning in to Bridge the